The Alpha King turned away his quiet mate, unaware she was the true heart of his kingdom, a true story, as it happened. There is a certain kind of man who has never once in his life sat still long enough to notice the people holding things together around him. The kind who moves so fast and talks so loud and decides so quickly that the space where other people might pause and look, that space simply does not exist in him. He is all forward motion, all certainty, all arrival. He fills every room he enters, and he empties them when he leaves, and he never once thinks to ask what stayed behind. Arian Callick was that man, 38 years old, chief of a Highland estate that had been in his family for 4 generations. The kind of man who walked into a room and the room rearranged itself, not because he demanded it, but because he was simply built that way. Broad, certain, the sort of certainty that gets handed down like property, from father to son, until it becomes so embedded in the family bone that no one even thinks to examine it. And the estate, Callick Moor, stretched across 300 acres of grey-green Scottish Highland, with its old stone walls and its frozen loch, and its 4 centuries of complicated land rights, had survived wars, debt, 2 near bankruptcies, 1 catastrophic flood, and the particular kind of ruin that comes from a generation of men who were very good at spending and not very interested in counting. It had survived all of those things for one reason that had nothing to do with Arian. Her name was Riva, and this is the story of what happened when he forgot that. Part 1. What she knew. Riva Locke had come to Callick Moor 6 years before all of this, in the middle of February, when the hills were the color of old pewter and the estate office smelled like damp paper and cold radiator. She was 31. She had a postgraduate qualification in archival studies from a university in Aberdeen, a suitcase full of books, and the kind of quiet that is not shyness but something else, a settled relationship with her own interior, the kind that develops in people who have spent enough time alone with difficult things and come through it. She had come for the archivist position, a job so quiet that the previous 2 people who held it had simply disappeared, absorbed back into ordinary life without ceremony. The post paid moderately. It required patience. It required someone who could spend a full afternoon with a 1962 land deed and find it genuinely interesting. Riva found it genuinely interesting. She was that kind of person, the kind who notices things no one else is looking at, the kind who remembers which drawer a document is in, not because she filed it yesterday, but because she understood why it mattered and where it belonged and what it connected to. She had the archivist's particular gift, a gift that looks, from the outside, like orderliness, but is actually something much more rare, the ability to hold a large system in her head and move through it without losing the thread. In her first month, she reorganized 6 years of backlogged correspondence into a system that any reasonable person could navigate. She did this without fanfare. She came in every morning, she made her tea, she worked through the lunch hour she was technically entitled to take, and she went home at 5 with her coat buttoned against the Highland wind. In her second month, she cross-referenced every land boundary on the estate against historical maps held in the Edinburgh National Registry, maps that had not been consulted in decades, that existed in a reference room that most of the estate's legal team did not know was available. She did this work on her own time, over 2 weekends, because she had noticed something in the existing files that unsettled her and she needed to be sure. She found 3 discrepancies. One of them was minor. One of them was interesting. One of them would have cost the estate £400,000 in a court dispute, had it gone to court, had the other party's solicitors been paying attention to the right records in the right year. It was the kind of time bomb that sits quietly in a filing cabinet for decades and then detonates when the conditions are right. Riva diffused it in a memo. 3 paragraphs. Clear language. Attached evidence. She addressed it to the estate's solicitors and left a copy on the then-manager's desk under a paperweight shaped like a small cairn. No one said thank you. She had not expected them to. The memo was noted, the relevant documents were updated, and the situation was quietly resolved. In the way of all things that are prevented from becoming disasters, it simply did not happen. She planted 3 succulents on the windowsill of her records room, a small fat one, a tall thin one, and one with spiky edges that she had bought at a market in Inverness, because it looked, she thought, like it would be difficult to kill. She made herself tea at 10 and at 3. She worked through her lunches with the door closed, not because she was unfriendly, but because silence was the medium in which she did her best thinking, and she had stopped apologizing for that a long time ago. The estate staff liked her, not in the way that people like someone charming or entertaining. Riva was neither of those things, not because she lacked warmth, but because her warmth was slow and specific rather than broad and performed. They liked her the way people like the foundations of a house, not consciously and not with any gratitude, but with the underlying certainty that things would be somehow harder, somehow less solid, without her. Part 2. The man himself, Arian, had not lived at Carrickmore full-time for 3 years before the events of this story began. He had offices in Edinburgh and a flat in London, and a schedule that ran from 6 in the morning to 9 at night, and left no room for the kind of reflection that requires stillness. He was, by every external measure, a success. He had rebuilt the investment arm of the Carrick estate from a modest ancestral trust into a serious and well-regarded portfolio over the course of a decade. He had a reputation in Edinburgh financial circles for being exact, decisive, and thoroughly uninterested in small talk or sentiment. He was also, it should be said, not a bad man. This is important because the story of what happened to the estate, and to Riva, and to him, is not a story about a villain. It is a story about attention, specifically about what happens when a person of genuine capability is never required to direct that capability at the things they take for granted. He had never been required to think about the estate's archive. The archive had always functioned. Therefore, in Arian's accounting of the world, the archive was a solved problem. He did not ask who had solved it, or how, or what it had cost them. His mother, Mira Carrick, a woman who held her opinions with the grip of someone who decided very early that being right was more important than being comfortable, had long maintained that her son needed a partner of appropriate standing. She said this with the confidence of a person who has never seriously considered the alternative. She had several candidates in mind. She brought them up at holidays and over phone calls with the subtle relentlessness of someone who understands that water and rock. Arian, for his part, was not opposed to the idea. He was not a man who examined his emotional life with great scrutiny, not because he was cold, but because his attention had always been directed outward, at problems that could be measured and solved. He wanted, broadly, what he had always wanted, for things to work correctly, for people to do their jobs, for problems to be identified and addressed. He returned to Carrickmore in February of that year with one specific problem to address: the estate's refinancing. Part 3. The first morning. The first morning he was back, Riva did what she always did. She arrived at the records room at 8. The sky outside was still dark, that February dark that sits over the highlands like a lid, gray and close and permanent feeling. She switched on the desk lamp, which threw a warm circle of light over the desk and the nearest shelves, and she made her tea, and she opened the window a crack, despite the cold, because she liked the sound of the estate in the morning. Not silence. It was never silent. Not really. The particular layered quiet of a large property waking up, the first crows, the distant sound of the estate manager's Land Rover on the gravel track, the way the wind moved through the gap between the stable block and the east wing. She sat at her desk. She opened the folder she had been working through the previous afternoon. She read for 20 minutes. At 8:30, there was a knock at her door. Not a real knock, the way you knock when you are asking permission. A knock the way you knock when you are announcing yourself, which is a different and smaller courtesy. Arian Carrick walked in. He was taller than she remembered from his last visit. Or maybe he just took up more space in the small records room than other people did elsewhere. His presence had a density to it, a solidity, the way some people seem to add mass to the air around them simply by being certain of where they are. Miss Locke. He said it the way people say the name of a place they are looking for on a map, correctly, and without warmth, and with their attention already elsewhere. Mr. Carrick. She pushed back her chair and stood, because it seemed like the kind of moment that called for standing. I need the trust documentation. The original 1962 deed, and everything that references it. All of it. Yes, she said. I have it. She did. She had had it organized for 4 years. A dedicated binder, forest green, with tabbed sections and a handwritten index on the inside cover that she had made herself, in the careful script she used for things that needed to be legible for a long time. The index cross-referenced every document in the binder against 4 other systems in the archive, with page numbers and annotation notes. She took it from the shelf without having to look for it. She set it on the desk in front of him. She opened it to the index page. She began to explain the structure, what was in each section, what her marginal annotations meant, why she had cross-referenced the 1962 deed against the 1979 boundary survey, what the cross-reference had revealed about the Northern Boundary Exclusion Clause, and why that clause mattered for any refinancing discussion. She was good at explaining, clear, unhurried, the kind of explaining that doesn't perform itself but simply moves information from one mind to another with minimum friction. She spoke for approximately 4 minutes. He listened for approximately 90 seconds. His phone rang. He held up one finger, the finger of a man who believes he is being courteous, when in fact he is being dismissive, and stepped slightly to the side and took the call. He turned so that his back was mostly toward her. He talked about something to do with the Edinburgh portfolio, a property valuation, a scheduled call with a consultant he needed to reschedule. 12 minutes. Riva sat back down at her desk. She picked up her tea. She looked at her succulents. The fat one had put out a new growth since autumn, a small pale arm reaching sideways from the base. She had been watching it for 3 weeks. When he finished the call, he picked up the binder. He flipped through it for a moment, with the speed of someone who is establishing that they have looked at something rather than actually reading it. "Thank you," he said, from the doorway, already leaving. The door closed. She looked at the window. The sky was lighter now. The crows had moved on to a different field. She had heard that kind of thank you before. The one that means nothing at all except that the person saying it has enough courtesy to produce the word without enough attention to mean it. She picked up her pen. She went back to the folder. Part 4. The Woman Who Arrived. Priya Ferris arrived in March. She came in a hired car from Inverness with 2 large bags, a pair of leather gloves, and the unruffled ease of a person who has spent considerable time being looked at and has made complete peace with it. She was 32. Her father was a Glasgow property developer, a practical, expansive man who had built a business on identifying undervalued things and making them visible. Priya had inherited his eye for value, though she applied it to rooms and people rather than land. She noticed, within 40 minutes of arriving at Callock Moor, that the drawing room carpet was original, that the east wing had subsidence issues someone had been patching rather than addressing, and that the estate manager was slightly afraid of Mira Callock. She was charming. There is no other word for it. She remembered names the first time she heard them. She asked questions that made people feel that their answers were worth giving. At the first dinner, she held a conversation about Highland estate management with Arian's solicitor that the solicitor would describe, to colleagues the following week, as one of the most interesting he'd had in years. Arian watched her across the table and thought, this is a person who fits. He was not wrong, exactly. She did fit. She fit the way a beautiful piece of furniture fits a room, correct in its proportions, appropriate in its style, adding to the impression the room makes on visitors. He had spent his entire adult life arranging things to fit. It was the quality he had most consistently rewarded in others and most consistently required of himself. He did not stop to ask what the room already contained, or whether adding new furniture required moving existing things aside. Riva was not invited to the dinners. She had never been invited to the dinners. This was not malice. It was structure. The structure of an estate that had always had a clear gradient between the people who ran it and the people who worked in it, and Riva had always been on one side of that gradient, not the other. She ate her meals in the records room or in the small kitchen off the service corridor. She did not find this degrading because she had long ago stopped measuring her worth by which table she sat at. She did notice, that March, that her requests for the estate manager's sign-off on certain archive maintenance tasks were taking longer to come back than usual. She noticed that the filing backlog she had been systematically working through, specifically a collection of 1990s correspondence that contained several letters directly relevant to the ongoing Brennan boundary dispute, kept being deprioritized when she raised it. She flagged this concern once, in writing, in a memo to the manager. She received a brief acknowledgement that the matter would be addressed. It was not addressed. She did not flag it again. She had learned, over the 6 years, which battles were worth the energy, and which ones she had to go around rather than through. She worked on the correspondence backlog herself, in the evenings, from her own home, using photographs she had taken of the documents on her phone. This was, technically, beyond the scope of her employment. She did it anyway. Part 5. What was moving? Quietly, March was a productive month for the estate, which was unusual. The refinancing, which had defeated 2 law firms and consumed 18 months without resolution, was finding its footing. Documents that had been impossible to locate were surfacing. Questions that the legal team had flagged as unanswerable were being answered, one by one, from a trail of references and cross-references that led back, always, to the same source, the annotated archive in the records room. A land boundary mediation with the neighboring Brennan family, a dispute that had been active, in various forms, for 4 years and had cost the estate considerable legal fees without resolution, was settled in a single session. The mediator described it, afterward, as an unusually well-documented case. The Brennan's solicitor, who had been expecting a prolonged fight, was visibly surprised by the depth and precision of the estate's supporting materials. The materials had been prepared by Riva. She had spent the previous autumn, on her own time, working from photographs on her phone in the evenings, compiling a comprehensive summary of the Brennan easement history, drawing on sources that went back to 1947. She had found, in a map held in the National Estate Archive, a survey notation that fundamentally undermined the basis of the Brennan claim. She had written a 6-page summary and sent it to the estate's solicitors in November, with a covering note that explained exactly what the notation meant and how it related to current proceedings. The solicitors had used it in the March mediation. They had described it in their summary to Arian as research compiled through the estate's usual channels. Aran had nodded and moved on. He did not ask what the usual channels were, or who had done the research. Things were working. He had learned not to disrupt things that were working. Part 6. The idea that changed everything. It was Priya's idea about the records room. They were walking the East Wing on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Arian, Priya, and Mira, who had the habit of appearing wherever decisions were being made, as if she could smell them from the other side of the house. The afternoon light was doing what it does in the highlands in spring, cutting in sideways and gold across the stone floors, making everything look more beautiful than it was. Priya stopped in the corridor outside the records room door. "What's that room?" Arian opened the door. Riva was not there. She was in the estate manager's office, which she visited every Thursday afternoon to collect her sign-offs, a process that had lately required sitting outside his door for 20 minutes while he finished whatever he was finishing. The room held her filing systems, her organized binders, her annotated maps, her cross-referenced folders, the running log she kept in a blue exercise book of every document accessed, by whom, and for what purpose. And on the windowsill, in the afternoon light, the 3 succulents, the fat one, the tall thin one, the spiky one from the market. "It's the archive," Arian said. Priya walked in. She turned around slowly. She did the thing she did with rooms, assessing them not for what they were, but for what they could be made into. "It's a wonderful room," she said. "South-facing. That light." "The archive is important," Arian said. "Of course," she said. "I just mean, is it the best use of this particular space? There are document management services. You could digitize everything, couldn't you? Keep it all accessible, but free up the room." Mira said nothing. She had learned when to let ideas take root, without watering them too visibly. Arian looked at the room. He had looked at this room hundreds of times over 6 years without really looking at it. He saw the space now, the proportions, the light, and he filed it in the part of his brain that organized things by potential. "I'll look into it," he said. And he did. Within 2 weeks he had spoken to a document management company, received a quote, and approved a restructuring plan. He did not speak to Riva about it. He had not thought to. Part 7. The letter. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was from the estate manager. It had been dictated, Riva could tell, and not written. The language had the particular over-formal quality of words, chosen by someone who wanted to avoid saying the direct thing. It said that the archive function was being consolidated into a third-party document management service as part of an ongoing estates modernization initiative. It said that, as a result, her position was being made redundant effective at the end of 8 weeks. It said that her contribution had been valued and that a reference would be available on request. It used the word restructuring 4 times. Riva read it twice. She set it on the desk beside her tea. She looked at the wall behind her desk, where she had pinned a map of the estate, not a decorative map, but a working one, covered in her annotations, overlaid with tracing paper on which she had marked the disputed boundaries in different colors. She looked at her succulents. The spiky one from the market had been doing particularly well since Christmas. She did not cry in the office. She had a rule about that, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had learned that certain feelings needed to happen in private, in a space where they had room to be what they were, without the complicating presence of other people's reactions. The parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in April was cold and gray and entirely private, and she sat in her car for 22 minutes with the heater on and let herself fall apart properly, the way you need to sometimes, the way that isn't weakness but just the necessary release of pressure that builds when you have been holding things together for a long time. Then she went home. She made dinner. She rang her cousin Fia, not to talk about the letter, but because Fia could always make her laugh, and laughter was something she had learned, in the years that required it, to seek out deliberately, rather than wait for. She slept. In the morning, she went back. Part 8. The last 8 weeks. She worked through the 8 weeks with the same unhurried care she had always brought to the job. If anything, she worked more carefully. She completed the 1990s correspondence backlog that had been deprioritized for months. She finished annotating the final section of the Boundary Map series, a project she had been working on incrementally for 2 years. She updated every index, cross-checked every reference, made sure that every connection she had mapped in her head over 6 years was also mapped somewhere on paper so that someone, someday, could find it. She prepared a handover document. 47 pages. It described the archive structure, the logic of the filing system, the cross-reference network, the outstanding tasks and why they mattered, and, most importantly, what the archive contained that no catalog could capture, the context, the history, the patterns she had noticed across decades of documents that only became meaningful when read against each other. She knew, as she wrote it, that almost none of it would be read. Handover documents of that length and specificity are almost never read, but she wrote it anyway, the way she had always done things, correctly, completely, for the work's sake rather than for the acknowledgement. She prepared one additional binder. No one had asked her to. No one knew she was making it. It was a distillation. Every document, every annotation, every cross-reference relevant to the 2 outstanding disputes that she knew were still unresolved, and that she knew could become serious problems if someone did not know where to look. The Brennan easement registration, the Northern Boundary Title question, the 1962 trust rider, the 1947 map, the filing deadline circled in red with a note beside it that said, "For registration, deadline 60 days from 14 March, must not be missed." She left it on the shelf. She packed her succulents into a cardboard box, all 3 of them. The fat one, the tall, thin one, the spiky one from the market. She wrapped them carefully in newspaper so they would not shift in the car. She carried the box to her car. She did not leave a note. She drove away on a Friday afternoon into a Highland May that was cold and bright and smelled like gorse. Part 9. What Summer Revealed. The document management service arrived in June. They were a professional outfit. 4 people, efficient and methodical, with barcode scanners and plastic boxes, and a laptop system that could categorize 2,000 documents in a working day. They were good at what they did. What they did was not what Riva had done, and the distinction was the kind that is invisible until you need to find something. They cataloged by date and document type. This is a rational system for a general archive. It is also a system that is entirely blind to the way documents in a working estate archive relate to each other, the web of reference and counter-reference and annotation that makes a collection of papers into a living system you can navigate rather than a storage problem you have organized. The annotated binders were separated from the documents they referenced because the system categorized them as secondary materials. The handwritten index on the inside cover of the 1962 trust binder was not included in the digital catalog because it was not a standalone document. The binder Riva had left, the one about the outstanding disputes, the one she had made without being asked, was filed in a category called miscellaneous, correspondence undated, because it contained multiple document types across multiple date ranges and no single category covered it adequately. No one looked at it. No one looked at any of it. Not closely. The system was running. There was a search function. There were reference numbers. The archive had been modernized, which was the point, and everyone moved on to the next thing. Part 10. The first sign of trouble. The first sign came in late June, and it came quietly, the way serious problems often do. A boundary survey commissioned as part of the refinancing process, standard procedure, required by the bank, returned results that were inconsistent with the land register records. Not wildly inconsistent, a discrepancy of 63 meters along the northern boundary, which, in the context of a 300-acre estate, sounds small until you understand what it touches. The surveyors flagged it. The legal team flagged it. The bank's own property solicitor flagged it. The discrepancy concerned the exact stretch of the northern boundary that was subject to the exclusion clause in the 1962 Callick Family Trust, the clause that protected 300 acres from subdivision or sale. If the boundary as recorded was incorrect, the exclusion clause might be attached to the wrong land. If the exclusion clause was attached to the wrong land, the title on the remaining acreage was unclear. If the title was unclear, the refinancing had no solid ground to stand on. Arian's solicitor called him on a Thursday afternoon. He used the phrase, material misrepresentation risk. There are phrases that make every property transaction stop breathing. That is one of them. What do we need? Arian asked. We need the original trust rider from 1962, the addendum to the main deed that defines the northern boundary exclusion clause in detail. The deed itself is insufficient. We need the addendum. Where is it? We've requested it from the Document Management Service. They've searched the catalog. They cannot locate a document matching that description under any of the reference categories. Arian said nothing for a moment. We'll keep looking, the solicitor said. He knew, without knowing why he knew, that something had gone wrong. Not with the property, with something inside the building, in a room he had walked through without looking. Part 11. July and the Brennan Claim. July brought the Brennan claim back, in writing, delivered to the estate's legal address on the 4th of the month. The March mediation had resolved the immediate dispute. The Brennans had withdrawn their claim on the eastern boundary acreage. The estate had acknowledged the easement's historical basis, and a formal settlement had been drafted. The settlement needed to be registered with the Land Register of Scotland within 60 days of the mediation date to be legally binding. The 60 days had passed. The registration had not been filed. The filing deadline had been noted in red ink in a binder filed under miscellaneous, correspondence, undated, in a records room that was now a room being converted into a guest suite. The Brennan solicitor was a thorough person. She checked deadlines. She checked land register filings. She found the gap. She filed a renewed claim on the 1st of July, with interest, citing the failure to register and the resulting lapse of the settlement agreement. The claim was for the disputed acreage plus legal costs. Arian was informed on a Wednesday morning. He was in Edinburgh. He sat down at his desk in a way that his assistant, looking through the glass wall of the office, had never seen him sit, without intention, without control, the way people sit when the floor has moved. He called the estate manager. He called the solicitors. He called the document service and asked them to locate every file relating to the Brennan dispute, the 1962 trust deed, the northern boundary survey, and anything marked as requiring action by any date in the previous 6 months. What came back was a collection of documents that were correctly cataloged, correctly referenced, and entirely without the context that would have made them useful. The pieces were there, the understanding of how they related to each other, the thread that ran through them, the annotations that connected them, the knowledge of what each one meant in relation to the others, was gone. It had been there. It had been in the margins, in the binders, in the handwritten index on the inside cover of the green 1962 trust folder. It was gone now. Or rather, it was not gone, but only one person had held it, and that person was no longer there. Part 12. What Fia said. Fia Kalak was Arian's first cousin on his mother's side, and she had a quality that was rare in the Kalak family. She saw things as they were, rather than as she wanted them to be. She was 41, and she ran a small architecture practice in Glasgow, with the same precision and directness she brought to every other part of her life. She had never been impressed by the estate in the way that the estate expected people to be impressed by it. She had grown up spending summers there, and familiarity had done what it always does to grandeur. She had always liked Riva. She had noticed Riva the way that people like Fia notice things, not because Riva had performed visibility, but because Fia was looking at the room rather than at the impression she was making in it, and Riva was there to be seen if you were actually looking. Fia came to the estate in late August. She came, officially, to see Mira, with whom she had the comfortable, frictionless relationship of two people who have long since understood each other's limits. She came, actually, to see what was happening, because what she was hearing from Mira in their phone calls had the particular quality of a situation being described by someone who does not want to name it. She and Arian sat in the kitchen one evening after dinner, long after Mira had gone to bed, with the lights low and the sound of the Highland wind doing what it does around the corners of old stone buildings. He told her about the refinancing, the failed timeline, the missing documents, the Brennan claim renewed, the document service which had done exactly what it was contracted to do, and in doing so had dismantled a system it had no way of understanding. Fia listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of her most important qualities. The only person who actually understood this estate, she said, when he finished, was Riva Lok. And you let her go. The expected argument did not come. He had been preparing one, unconsciously, on the walk from the dining room to the kitchen, some version of the defense a man makes when he knows he is in the wrong, and is not yet comfortable saying so. But Fia's delivery had none of the sharpness that invited argument. It was just information, stated plainly. And he had run out of arguments against information. She was the archivist, he said. It sounded smaller when he said it out loud than it had in his head. She was the person who knew where everything was, what it meant, how it all connected, and what it was going to matter for in 3 years' time, Fia said, which is not, in a property situation with active legal disputes, a decorative quality. She poured more tea. Call her, she said. Part 13. The records room. Alone, he went to the records room the next morning. It was in the process of being converted. One wall had been painted. There were swatches pinned to another. The shelving was still there because removing it had been quoted separately, and the quotes were being reviewed. He walked along the shelves. He pulled folders, opened them, turned pages. He was not reading them. He did not have the knowledge to read them meaningfully. He was looking for something he could not name, the way you look through a house for the thing that has changed when you cannot identify the change itself. He found the binder she had left. Miscellaneous. Correspondence. Undated. A printed label on the spine, neat and without meaning. He opened it. Her handwriting was exactly as he remembered it from the margins of the documents he had briefly looked at in February, before his phone had rung. Contained. Precise. The handwriting of someone who was used to making information last. He read the index on the inside cover. He read the summary of the 1947 map discovery. He read the notes on the Brennan mediation. He found the deadline circled in red, with the note beside it. He turned to the section on the northern boundary and read her annotation of the 1962 trust rider, the rider that the document service could not locate because it had been filed with the correspondence rather than with the deed, because she had known that was where it logically belonged and had placed it there accordingly. He found the 1962 trust rider. It was in the binder. It had been there the whole time. In the building, in the records room, on the shelf labeled miscellaneous, correspondence, undated. He stood there for a long time. The window was bare. The windowsill was bare. He had not noticed, in all the months since May, that something had been on the windowsill for 6 years and was now gone. He noticed it now. The absence had a shape to it. 3 small shapes, in the corner of the frame where the afternoon light came in gold. He held the binder in both hands. He was not a man who felt things easily, not in the way that feelings announce themselves. But he felt something now, a weight that was not the weight of the binder, but of what it represented. 6 years of careful, specific, patient knowledge. 6 years of watching and connecting and understanding. 6 years of someone being, quietly, the thing that made everything else possible. And then not being, because he had not looked. Part 14. The call. He found her number in her personnel file and he dialed it from the desk in the records room. Her desk, the one she had sat at every morning for 6 years. The one with the faint mark on the left side where she had always set her tea. 4 rings. Hello? Her voice was the same, completely the same, unhurried, level, with none of the performance of warmth that people add to their phone voices when they are trying to make a good impression. She was simply there, in the way she was always simply there. This is Arian Kalak. A pause. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of someone deciding something quickly. Mr. Kalak. He had prepared a version of what he was going to say. He had spent time on it, trying to frame it professionally, cleanly, without making it sound like what it was, which was a man who had dismantled something he did not understand, calling the person he had dismissed to say that he needed her back. I found your binder, he said. That was not what he had prepared. Another pause, shorter. Which one? She said. Which one? 2 words. The fact that there were multiple binders she could have left. The fact that she had been the kind of person who might leave behind any number of carefully prepared resources because that was simply how she worked, what she did, the level of care she brought to every task regardless of whether anyone was watching or would notice, said everything. He felt the weight of those 2 words. The outstanding disputes one, he said. The one with the Brennan files and the northern boundary. The one with the deadline circled in red. Ah, she said. And then quietly, the registration deadline has passed. I know. We're managing it. I need your help. Silence. Not hostile silence. Not cold. Just real silence. The kind that has content in it, that is doing something. He waited. He was not accustomed to waiting. People in his professional world moved at his pace, responded to his timeline. He waited now, and he understood, in some unexamined way, that he had earned the waiting. I'd want a proper contract, she said. A consulting agreement with a clear scope and a proper rate, not the old arrangement. Of course, I'll keep my own copies of everything I work on. That's sensible, he said, and he meant it. Completely, without reservation. I'll send you my rate, she said. It arrived by email the following morning. It was significantly higher than her old salary had been. He agreed to it without negotiating, and he noticed, doing so, that he felt something he could only describe as relief, not at the agreement, but at the number, at the fact that she had named what her work was actually worth, rather than what she had been told it was worth. Part 15. The Return. She came back on a Tuesday in September. She parked in the same spot. She walked through the service entrance, which was the entrance closest to the records room. The room was half converted, one wall freshly painted, the shelving still in, the paint swatches still on the opposite wall. It looked like a room caught between what it had been and what someone had decided it should become. She set her bag down. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the shelves. Then she began reorganizing. 2 hours. No commentary, no visible frustration. She moved things back into a structure she could work with. Not quite the original system, because things had been moved and some were missing, but a functional adaptation that preserved the logic she had built. Arian came in at 11. He knocked. A proper knock, waiting for the answer before entering. She said, "Come in," and when he opened the door, she was at the desk with folders open in front of her and her reading glasses on, and the particular quality of focus around her that he recognized, belatedly, as the quality the records room had always had when she was in it. "Thank you for coming back," he said. She looked at him, not warmly, not coldly, with that steady directness that had always been hers. "Where do you want to start?" she said. Part 16. The work she started with the Brennan claim. The missed registration was a problem, but not an insurmountable one. There was a mechanism, an application for late registration with the land register, supported by evidence of the original settlement's validity and the genuineness of the error. The key was the evidence. The evidence was Riva's. She located the mediation record, the supporting documentation she had prepared in advance of the March session, the 1947 map and her annotation, the 1962 trust rider, from the binder Arian had found, which she returned to its proper home in the cross-reference system rather than miscellaneous, correspondence, undated. She assembled the case documentation with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. The solicitors, working from Riva's assembled package, filed the late registration application in September. The land register acknowledged it in October. The northern boundary title question, the one that had collapsed the refinancing, was resolved in the same month, when she located the 1962 trust rider addendum in 15 minutes, knowing immediately which category it had been filed with and why, because she had filed it there herself years before, and her own logic was still, underneath the disruption, the logic the archive ran on. She brought it to Arian on a Thursday afternoon. He looked at it. He looked at her. "How long did you know this existed?" he asked. "I found the reference to it in 2019, she said. "I noted it in the handwritten index in the 1962 trust binder, the index on the inside cover." He was very still. "The one I didn't read," he said. "Yes," she said. She did not say it unkindly. She did not need to add anything. The truth of the thing was plain, and they both knew it, and she was not the sort of person who emphasized plain truths beyond what they needed. She picked up her tea. She went back to her desk. Part 17. What he understood now. He read the handover document she had left in May, all 47 pages. He read it in the evenings, in the study, with a glass of water and the lamp on, and the Highland dark sitting against the windows. It was the most illuminating document he had ever read about the estate, more illuminating than the financial reports, more illuminating than the legal summaries. It described not just what the archive contained, but why it was organized the way it was, what each section connected to, what could be found by following which thread. It described, in the careful language of someone who has spent years translating specialist knowledge into forms that non-specialists can use, how to understand the estate the way the estate needed to be understood. It was 6 years of one person's knowledge, written down against the possibility that someone who needed it might someday try to find it. He read it 3 times. He thought about the memo she had written in her second month, the 3 discrepancies, the one that would have cost £400,000. He thought about the Brennan mediation in March, which had succeeded because of research she had done on her own time, from photographs on her phone. He thought about the refinancing documents that had been finding their footing over the spring, resolution after resolution, each one tracing back eventually to a file she had built, or a cross-reference she had made. He had attributed all of it to the estate's legal team, to the document management service, to the usual channels. The usual channels had been one person, working carefully, year after year, in a room at the end of a corridor that he had walked past without looking. He thought about what that meant, not just professionally. He turned it over in his mind, the way you turn over something that has weight to it and keep being surprised by the weight. He was not, in the end, a man who collapsed under this kind of knowledge. He had too much discipline for that. But he sat with it. He let it settle. He let it change the way he looked at things, the way he asked questions, the way he moved through the estate. Part 18. November Priya, left in November. Not dramatically. There was no confrontation, no scene, no moment of revelation. What there was, instead, was the gradual and mutual recognition of 2 people who had been performing something for each other and had both grown tired of the performance. One evening in early November she said, "I think you have other things on your mind." He said, "I'm sorry." she said. "I think I was always more interested in this place than in you, which is probably not the right order of things." He almost laughed. It was the most honest thing she had said to him in 8 months. She left the following morning with the same elegant ease she had arrived with. Mira said nothing for 4 days. This was extraordinary. On the 5th day she said well, and then she too said nothing more, and Arian understood that she had looked at the situation and found it not worth arguing with, which was the closest she came to accepting something she had not expected. Part 19. December. The closing. The refinancing was finalized on a Tuesday in the first week of December. The Brennan late registration had been approved by the Land Register in late November. The northern boundary title question had been resolved. The bank's requirements had been met, one by one, with documentation that was complete and clear and precisely cross-referenced. The solicitor's covering letter to the bank, listing the supporting materials, included in its second paragraph an acknowledgement that the estate's historical documentation had been compiled and maintained by the head of estate records and knowledge management. Riva had not asked for it. She had not expected it. The signing happened in a solicitor's office in Inverness, in a room that smelled like central heating and old wood, on a morning when the first snow of the season was sitting on the hills to the north, pale and clean. Arian drove back to the estate in the afternoon. The records room light was on. He knocked. She said, "Come in." She was at her desk. There were 3 new succulents on the windowsill. She had brought them from home a month ago, when it had become clear that the consulting arrangement was lasting longer than either of them had initially agreed. "It's done," he said. "Good," she said. He sat down in the visitor's chair. He looked at her desk, at the folders open on it, at the cup of tea at her elbow, at the 3 succulents in the afternoon light. "I want to offer you a permanent position," he said, "head of estate records and knowledge management, a proper title, a proper salary. I'd like you to consider it." She considered him for a moment. "How proper is the salary?" she said. He named the figure. She was quiet. She looked at the window. The snow line on the northern hills was lower than it had been this morning. "That's 3 times what I was earning before," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is," which is approximately what the work was worth. Even before. She looked at him then, not with particular warmth or particular coldness, with the same directness she always had. "I'll want it in writing before I decide," she said. "Of course. Full employment contract. Clear reporting structure. Written acknowledgement in any legal or financial documentation that draws on archive research." "Already drafted," he said. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Just slightly. "Third clause," he said. Part 20. What she decided. She took 3 days. She read the contract carefully, not quickly, the way people read things when they trust the other party, but carefully, the way you read something when you know from experience that the details matter. She made 3 requests for amendments. He agreed to all 3 without negotiation. She rang Fia. Fia said, loudly and without qualification, that she should take it. Fia also said, which surprised Riva slightly, that she had been the one to suggest the initial call, that she had told Arian to phone Riva after the evening in the kitchen in August, which Riva had half suspected but not confirmed. He could still revert, Riva said. People like him have a moment of seeing things, and then the moment closes over. Maybe, Fia said. He knocked, though. Riva was quiet. On the door, Fia said. The day you came back, he knocked and waited for you to say come in. I know, Riva said. I noticed. In 38 years, Fia said, I have never once seen that man knock on a door and wait. Riva looked at the succulents on her kitchen windowsill. The originals. Home now after 6 months. The fat one with its new sideways arm. The tall, thin one. The spiky market one. She made her decision. Not because of the knock, exactly. Not because of the salary, although the salary was correct and correctness matters. Because the work was hers. Because the estate's archive was something she understood at a level that no one else did, and she had spent 6 years building that understanding, and leaving it behind would have been its own kind of loss, because the terms were now right. And she had learned, in the years that required it, to wait for the terms to be right. Part 21. The signing. She signed the contract on a Thursday morning in the second week of December, in the records room, at her desk, with the winter light coming in through the window where the succulents were already back in their spots. Arian signed across from her. The estate manager witnessed it. When it was done, Arian stood and said, "Thank you." She looked at him, not with the expression she had worn in February, when he had said thank you from the doorway, already leaving. She looked at him the way you look at something that has changed into what it needed to be. "You're welcome," she said. And she meant it. Epilogue. The real story. The refinancing was complete. The Brennan dispute was settled. Properly, with a land register filing dated the 3rd of November. The northern boundary was secure, documented, beyond challenge. The Callickmore archive was by the following spring so thoroughly and sensibly organized that 3 neighboring estates, 2 in the Highland region, 1 in Perthshire, sent their own people to learn the system. Riva supervised the visits. She made tea. She explained the logic of the cross-reference network in language that was clear and specific and entirely without condescension. She was, by every account, an excellent teacher. The people who came to learn from her left not just with a system, but with the understanding of why the system worked, which is the harder and more important thing to transmit. The records room was not converted into a guest suite. Instead, the East Wing's existing spare bedroom was refurbished, a better room for guests, with proper light and direct access to the garden. This was Fia's suggestion, made during a visit in January. Arian had agreed immediately, because he had learned, by then, to consult the people who understood the building before making decisions about it. Mira adapted to the new arrangement with the particular grace of a woman who recognizes when a situation has resolved into something better than what she had planned, even if the resolution looks nothing like her plan. She never said this directly. She said, instead, during a Sunday dinner in February, "The archive has really come together," which was, for Mira, high praise. The succulents on the records room windowsill numbered 7 by spring, the 3 originals. 2 new ones that Riva had bought at the Inverness market in January. One that had been given to her by a neighboring estate's archivist as a thank you for the training session. One that Fia had sent in the post, inexplicably, in a small box with a note that said only, "You stayed. Well done." And Arian, he changed. Not into a different man. That kind of total transformation is the thing of certain kinds of stories, and this is not that kind of story. He changed into a more complete version of himself, which is what real change looks like. He knocked on doors. He read the inside covers of binders. He asked, when things were working, how they were working and who had made that happen. He paid attention to the quiet things. He was not always good at it. He had decades of inattention to work against, and the habits of a person who has never been required to look beneath the surface of things are not overturned in a season. But he tried. Consistently, imperfectly, with the genuine effort of someone who has understood something real and decided it is worth the difficulty of changing. That, in the end, was enough. Not everything, not the whole story, not a redemption in the grand sense. Enough. This story is not about a man who realized at the last moment what he had in a woman and was transformed by the realization. That is a different story, with a different shape. This story is about the kind of knowledge that goes unseen in every room, in every office, every organization, every building that runs on expertise that does not announce itself, that files its own memos and updates its own indexes and cross-references its own records and leaves its own binders on the shelf for whoever comes after. The knowledge that is invisible precisely because it is successful, that prevents disasters so thoroughly that no one ever sees the disaster it prevented. Riva did not stay because Arian finally saw her. She stayed because the work was hers, and she had decided with both eyes open that the terms were now correct. There is a difference. It is an important difference. A woman who stays because she has finally been seen is in a different story than a woman who stays because she has negotiated the terms she deserved, and the conditions are now worth returning to. Riva was in the second story. She knew it. She had chosen it deliberately. The estate hummed around her, the way it always had, all those small sounds layered under each other, the crows, the wind, the distant sound of the Land Rover on the gravel track. the particular quiet of a large property in the early morning that is not really quiet at all. She opened her folder. She was home. End.